I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Gray. First, if you'd like to help with our fundraiser for production of Doors of Perception Part 2, we would love to be able to head out to Northern California as well as the other locations that we're already slated to hit. So right now, any donation of $50 or more, you'll get a 1-hour private discussion with myself about any topic or topics of your choice, or you can get a guest spot on Forbidden Knowledge News. You get a download of Doors of Perception 1, and you'll get a download of Doors of Perception Part 2 when it comes out. Like I said, anything is greatly appreciated. We have those links for you right in the description. We are booking guests for June and July. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Gray. He claims to be a former Monarch deep state asset turned whistleblower who founded OrganizedSafety.org, which is an anonymous reporting database for high-risk and high-level criminal activity. Gray, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on and discussing this information. Like I was telling you before, because of the nature of these topics, it can be very controversial. Oftentimes, there can also be lack of physical evidence, as well as the stigma behind things like mind control operations, satanic ritual abuse, and oftentimes at very high levels of politics, the military, and many well-respected institutions. Being involved in this, it can be a very delicate thing to cover. Like I was telling you before, I've heard many stories that align with yours in very profound ways, and there's definitely something dark and nefarious occurring in some circles of power. But we're also in an age where we're drowning in misinformation, propaganda, and trying to find the truth can be almost impossible. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your story from yourself and see if we can put more pieces of this disturbing puzzle together. But this is your first time on. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Let the audience know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you. You can find me basically the majority of my outreach at this point is on X, or formerly Twitter, at Gray Area Monarch. And basically what I'm representing and kind of the message that I'm spreading would be organized safety, which is organizedsafety.org, which is essentially an intake reporting form where you can anonymously report some of these, more protected activities that are, kind of hard to get at. And you can make anonymous reports, but you can opt in for notifications if your report is corroborated by another party. So we can go more into that because I'm kind of, my message is that it's not about any one person can be essentially demonized. They can be picked apart. They can be discredited, character assassinations. What it's about is the overlap. It is about the corroboration, the blind corroboration, just throughout the nation, and kind of like you said, putting the pieces together. And this is kind of like as safe of a possible way of doing that, and then formulating basically packages we can put together to present more credibly to best inform people and best pursue justice.
Right on. So I think the best way to start would be, especially for those that aren't familiar with your story, give us a basic overview, starting as early as we can, as far back as you can remember, how you got involved with these operations and projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in upstate New York on the edge of the Adirondack Mountains. My grandfather was a former air engineer in World War II. He got tapped and pulled into the OSS. Then back here in the States, he was a logger and also involved with NASCAR. So he was all about the high risk, high reward, understood that, also had kind of the war fighter mentality by any means necessary. His own children went into NASCAR, again, high risk, high reward. He enrolled his own children and grandchildren in some of these, behavioral modification programs that also coincided with enhanced development. What really goes on is some of these deep classified projects, going all the way back to the Manhattan Project and before, they don't rely just on standard human behavior to keep this secrecy, to maintain this veil. And people say, oh, well, how does this stuff happen? We would have heard about it. Well, how many of the top classified operations have you heard about? Only what's hit the news. Let's be realistic here. A lot of people don't really know the specifics of any of this stuff. There's a whole world that people don't know about. People don't know about other religions than what they practice or other cultures, let alone the most classified clandestine programs. So anyways, I was entered through that lens. There's different aspects of this, and, feel free to stop and interject at any point here. But the way I look at this is there's two main branches here. There's kind of the network, which would be anybody kind of related with this on especially the military end. But then you have the family, the cult, the believers, the people that, may be bloodliners or may have genealogy going back that, were involved with this kind of occult, hidden world, hidden religion, this tribal culture, this tribal religion, Luciferians, if you will. And then you have, again, the people in the network, which may also be part of the family, be part of the cult, but they may not be believers. They may just have that warfighter mentality, may believe by any means necessary, the ends justifies the means, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, by the time I turned 4, I don't know all the specifics, but my grandfather had become disillusioned. He realized that this project, these programs stemming from, MK Ultra derived research and behavioral modification, this trauma, torture, and technology-based mind control conditioning, it wasn't just about weird traumas to elicit dissociation and then expounding upon that to kind of compartmentalize parts of the psyche that can be used operational, whether it be for a courier or, exponentially worse going towards, mind-controlled patsy or assassin. He realized some of these people actually believe in what they're doing. And for that, he was effectively neutralized. He was eliminated. And at that point, my handling, because he did do my early childhood conditioning up to the age of 4, he was killed for becoming disillusioned, and he turned into a liability for these people. And after he was eliminated, I was handed off to my next door neighbors, and they were generational funeral directors and morticians. Okay, they were also necromancers, and people say, "Oh, what's that?" Well, these are the type of specialists that are hired for certain things. And if they need an IT expert, the government might not have someone in-house to handle that. They might outsource to a specialist that specializes in the skills that they need to do this specific job. And when it comes to unethical and dark neuroscience, when it comes to what some people understand as black magic, which any possible phenomena aside, at its core is dark neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience applied. They go to specialists such as generational necromancers, generational funeral directors, to condition some of their child subjects, because this has to start from young. This dissociation, this halting the integration of the brain development, of the different phases in the brain development, that needs to be done at a certain age in order to essentially make a split personality. Dissociative identity, what may be called an isolated neural network now in certain therapy, or maybe called an internal family system. It's important not to bicker over semantics because there's a variety of different themed nomenclature that can be used to describe this, and that is kind of like, babble used to separate the people, when we're really generally talking about the same thing wherever your ideology and beliefs lie. Again, so they have contracted these specialists to layer this off, plausible deniability, to do this part of the job, to where they use these dark methods to condition. We have these morticians, these funeral directors. They have access to bodies. They can use them to desensitize children, to condition them for future roles. So these people will not encounter sort of things first time on the job and freeze up. You need these people to be familiar with this, desensitized, and to be able to, do the job that they need to do. And unfortunately, just like dogs are line bred and then trained from day one. And if you take a working dog compared to just someone's household pet, that's a completely different animal. It's the same with this. So, to remain competitive on the world stage, and for these true occultist globalists that are, bent on world domination, these people are training themselves and others as young as possible.
Well, let's break down the purpose for these programs. Like you were just saying, they are mainly for grooming purposes, for politicians, like you said, assassins, celebrities, but it can go all the way down to just throwaway individuals that can be used for human hunting or sacrifices, all the way up to the highest levels of society. Am I right?
Absolutely. There's a spectrum. The bloodliners tend to be less expendable. The rest, it's kind of, how are these people used? If they can successfully be conditioned and climb the ranks, they are. Otherwise, yes, they can become expendable. Depends where they got them from. A lot of the harsher and more experimental methods for research and development will be on certain class of people. What works and sticks and is used is put into the enhanced development, and then they use this on themselves and, these rulers, the parasitic elite class. Right. But yeah, so it's a wide variety. These people do this sort of thing and live by this religion, live by this tribal culture themselves. Absolutely. And they agree to enter into this, to enter to these, rules and punishments. They are in this themselves, and they are truly believers. But yes, there is a wide spectrum of uses, that people are used for, that go through this process.
Mm-hmm. And what age were you brought in to these operations, and what use were they wanting you to be implemented in? And maybe we could go a little over some of the processes that you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously I was being groomed and trained, since birth. I was, being tortured, the dissociation. By the time you're 8, the kind of like severest, worst torture that makes that dissociation and essentially a split personality, just to communicate here, those are already made. Then it kind of goes more into training and conditioning. Still a lot of trauma, but that's just kind of to reinforce and to kind of like call up these parts. But so going through my teens, I was groomed and I was routed basically into the criminal underworld. And I always had some friends of the family that I was kind of brought up under, separated kind of as an adolescent. I was pulled from school. I was homeschooled, and essentially, was just running wild on my own, getting into things. But then I was pulled under the wings of some people that were military intelligence and also part of a motorcycle club. And what they routed me to was actually getting into several things. One of them was growing marijuana. And by the time I became 18, I already had just a network of marijuana grow houses, and also, some would essentially be safe houses. They had kind of trained me to have different identities. I had took college level private investigation courses and things like this. And essentially, they led me to believe that I was going to be able to enter the clandestine services to fight pedophiles, because they used my rage against the abuse I endured as a child, that I was willing to do by any means necessary to fight this evil. So thinking that I was becoming part of the white hat network, essentially I was training organized groups to use the lesser evil, if you will. And instead of selling hard drugs and these methods, we would do a cleaner method of growing marijuana, which was less crime, more money, less risk. But then through the network of military intelligence, they were using me to outsource some of their dirty work through these networks that I was affiliated with. So I was essentially cleaning up areas to where, you know, we would go into gangs, cartel activity, things like this, show them how to grow marijuana, sophisticated methods, again, less violence, less risk, clean appearances, more of a mafia-esque fashion, if you will. You know, violence isn't good for money, right? So that's kind of what I was doing. I was building up a network of human assets and things where we can outsource, you know, some of the dirtier work, but again, maintaining more clean appearances. Of course, this was still business as usual in the back, because this was allowing even worse atrocities in the big picture to take place. Even though very up close to it, I couldn't see the whole picture. It seemed like I was making things better until I became closer and closer into the fold. I was being desensitized. I was being stair-stepped in, all the while became plausible deniability. And by the time I turned 21, you know, went officially into the clandestine services, was sworn in front of a limited panel, and at that point became an actual plausible deniable asset. At this point, I started getting pulled, and once I was fully blackmailing myself, fully ready to be burnt at any time. This is when personal favors for politicians, political families I was around, and other people started coming forward, and they really pushed to pull me into the fold. And essentially, you know, I came to things I just couldn't stomach and couldn't do. And that's, you know, when I bucked against this. But that's where it led in.
When you say they were coming to you with favors, maybe give us an idea of what kind of things that they were requiring you to do for them.
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, I'll be honest, there was quite the jump. And some of it, I think, was due to compartmentalization. I don't know all of what they were talking about on the back end amongst themselves and where the compartmentalization lay with them specifically. But I will say, for example, you know, one of the main kind of like locations, the kind of like HQs, if you will, of the clandestine services there, was a strip club that was right on the corner of two intersecting highways there in Nashville, okay? And then in the basement, it also linked up with some tunnels that went out through under the Nashville graveyard into the municipal area and all this. And, you know, there was like a, you know, a casino and, you know, basically like a prostitution ring that was under there, right? So one of the females there was a mind-controlled monarch, what's known as a beta, basically a honeypot sex slave, so on and so forth. She had contracted HPV, and this HPV actually was transferring to genital warts in males 3 months later. That's apparently what happens with some types of HPV. And what really broke the camel's back, the straw that broke the, you know, was that they wanted me to neutralize a female that had given several of their clients and a prominent politician genital warts. So that was one of the things. The other one was there was the sheriff of Williamson County, Headley. He had become embroiled in a major pain pill scandal, and he basically got let off lightly. He had to step down from being sheriff, and he got misdemeanors instead of like tons of felonies. He was hooked up with the network and was kind of like helping that area out in Williamson County, which is like the richest part around Nashville. It's right beside it, and like, you know, where all the country music stars live and so on and so forth. His son was a deputy, and his son had raped a woman. And his son was right at that age too, where he was kind of getting pulled in, and he, you know, was talking too much and wanted the same treatment that his father had, which was like, oh, I'm going to get out of this, so on and so forth. And they wanted him neutralized as well. You know, that's the kind of things that it was. It was basically neutralizing people, you know, things that I wasn't willing to do that had nothing to do with national security, that had nothing to do with the greater good. It was clearly just to maintain control within their, you know, enriching themselves.
Give us an idea of how widespread and organized this network is. From what it sounds like, there are players and individuals involved at very low levels, although they may not know exactly where the orders are coming from or why they're doing things. They are following orders, and it seems to be a hierarchical type of system that these individuals are following, but it does seem to go into lower levels of society. How much those people know, that's the question.
Yeah, so I can explain this well. You have a few different mechanisms, and what they do is they seeded some of this infrastructure, but whether they seeded it, obviously they don't own every single person within it, but some they just piggyback on. So kind of like just separating by classes, and I don't look at people by lower class. If you say lower class, like I would be technically lower class. We're just communicating here. But lower class, you have a lot of these gangs. And for example, if you look into the history of like vice lords or folk and stuff, you see some of this was made, actually created at a correctional institute in Illinois, right? And if you look at where these behavioral correctional facilities were made, like these were things that have overlap with the history of MK Ultra, okay? So you have some of these gangs have the same occult hierarchy, even though it's different themed nomenclature. You still go through the same trauma base, the same tiered knowledge, and the lower level following orders blindly and only getting more information as they climb the ranks and then exploit the lower. You have the same thing with the Masons. You have the same thing, they're piggybacking on Rotary clubs. Moose lodges, elk lodges. And I'm not saying I agree with all these terms, but not everybody that's really in this is bad or anything like that. Some people actually mean well. Again, whether you agree, with the practices or any of that, I personally don't. But it's just important not to demonize every individual. But so what happens is, a lot of these people have absolutely no idea. They believe that, hey, I'm part of this and trying to do good, and we're just trying to do good for ourselves. The people in the gangs, they know the politicians and stuff are the real crooks in doing this. In their mind, by any means necessary. We're oppressed. We're doing what we have to do to build up and, want to overthrow these people, following orders, making deals with the devil, so to speak, along the way. You see the crossover in symbology, the same occult hierarchy, same thing. It goes. Crossover again, same thing with the Masons, even getting into military. And at the mid levels, this is all mid to high levels. This is all managed by the clandestine services. The clandestine services will have people, have human intelligence agents that are developing networks and actually manage some of these motorcycle clubs, going into the 1%ers and all this, some of the gangs, some of the cartels. They'll have their people do some training, do some things, say, hey, we're not going to bust y'all, stay out of this area. Go in this area. Hey, we need you to do this favor. And, they're having deals like this. So that's kind of like how that's made. Now, you get up in this clandestine services, the limited oversight of this are part of operational subgroups. And these operational subgroups, for example, will have key personnel from FBI, from DIA, CIA, NSA, NRO, and then basically just a wide range of personnel to unite the access and the powers of all these different agencies. And they will be managing and part of the clandestine services, these operational subgroups that are managing all these different networks. So they piggyback on this infrastructure, on other infrastructures that are established and operating independently, but they have key personnel make deals where they need to and operate it. Now, this steps up to like the NSC, the National Security Council, and associated with that. And then at that level, the members that are managing them and that they report to in these, unacknowledged special acts, these are managed exclusively by personnel that are like Knights of Malta or members of dragon societies. A key example of this would be if you're familiar with Oliver North in the Iran-Contra scandal, to where they were importing cocaine to fund Nicaraguan war and PSYOPs and so on and so forth. But also, some people may not be familiar, the Oliver North crew and the National Security Council members he was with were responsible for the creation of FEMA, Federal Emergency Militarized Action. That's what it was originally called. And, there was a scandal called Rex 84 Bravo where, they were running drills to lock up what they saw as dissidents, but were, American citizens, so on and so forth. And, there was a whole scandal with that. And they were spending 12 times the amount on covert operations that they were on disaster relief. So Oliver North was a Knight of Malta. And essentially, that's what's going on is you keep on going, stair-stepping up, and then eventually you get to the part where these age-old, occult societies, these secret societies, these age-old orders. So you have the Malta, the Jesuits, the Vatican, all that umbrella, and then you have the dragon societies, which are kind of on par with them. But like, just to give an idea, OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which became CIA, that was made by Malta, and the key players that created that were Knights of Malta. But then you have dragon societies, for example, like Hitler's people, the SS and all that, they were members of the Green Dragon Society. So it's kind of, you have like these age-old societies that go way back and transcend nations. You know, Malta was Malta before the United States was made, before there was an America. Back when they were created, you know, everywhere in the Middle East had a different name. So like, this is nothing new. Some of these methods obviously, you know, grow with the times, and, you know, the themed nomenclature changes over time. But that's what happens is eventually, once you get up the tier, you get into the management to where they do know what's going on, and they are part of globalist orders that go back, you know, very far.
One of the biggest questions many have, and many will have while listening to this, is how are you allowed to talk about this now? How did you get out? Is there some sort of fail-safe mechanism that would prevent you from saying certain things? Have you made agreements? How did you get out of this? Yes.
So in 2008, when this went bad, when they tasked me to neutralize that woman, you know, and again, I came up around people being abused like that, and like I was never with that sort of thing. So at that point, I had basically been operations manager at a black site. Ironically, that was set up by the Oliver North crew, right? By back then Task Force 160, you know, 160th SOAR black helicopters, right? Back then there was like the death dealers, and a lot of them were all under the 160th. Now it's all branched out and scattered more, harder to trace. But so I was running a site where a lot of people like me that went through MK Ultra Monarch mind control conditioning, and they were doing modern day Rex 84 Bravo drills, stuff like that. In there, going through rite of passage, being trained to eventually manage cartels, manage gangs, go into this industry, go into that industry. And I was linked up with a lot of people. I was also linked up with people that were already high up and went even further in the music executive business, and, you know, into other media and other influencers, right? So essentially, me and other people had already seen the writing on the wall and, you know, knew what was going on. So of course, we all would have information. We all had took mutual blackmail pacts, right? We all had mutual blood oaths even. I mean, at this point, this is what this was. I was raised in this, and I became disillusioned, but, you know, we had partaken in mutual blackmail, and then we even had our families entangled in lesser crimes. That's how this is done at this level. You don't get there without having that on yourself. It's a sterile protocol. If you don't have blackmail, if you don't have these entanglements, you will not climb to that level. It's mandatory. It's just mandatory. Everybody agrees to these rules. It's a smart design, so it works. So what happened was, when I went against this, one of the things I took was I had took a database of assets. A lot of this was tracked, and some of my associates had, and we actually had proof on this. What had happened was, you know, then I was involved in a Boston Brakes accident to where they had sabotaged my car. I had half my body broken, you know, I woke up in the hospital. You know, some of my associates are also disillusioned. And yes, there is a lot of evidence for this sort of thing. And it's not just us. There's tons of people that have pockets of evidence. Getting it out through media and stuff is another thing. But, you know, there are good men, and there are just men that are good and bad, and just like, you know, have opposing agendas and opposing ideals and have problems, that do have information, right? In 2013 and 14, I started talking about this, and horrible things happened. At that point, you know, they approached me again and said, hey, there were some corrupt people. We're going to handle this internally, and basically shut up. You can't talk about this publicly. You know, you can help people on the back end. You can do your thing, but you can't talk about this publicly. And there was parameters, right? I agreed to that. They created a plan. I was to start my own business. There's called a creative compensation package, creative compensation plans, to where essentially everything's on my own accord, but then it'll feed business, things like this, so on and so forth. That went for a little while. Basically, eventually I saw, no, this is a lie. They told me something sweet that I wanted to hear so I could believe it and believe I was doing good again, but it's the same thing. I saw them doing it with other people. And once like COVID hit basically and all this, like, it started becoming more clear, hey, they're cleaning house, they're transitioning to more technological control from these overt trauma methods. They're like, you know, the Epstein thing's coming out, you know, I got to Diddy, but like really what's going on is they're minimally ticking the boxes for public relations to make things look good, but they're implementing technological control. So I said, I just can't take this anymore. I'm going to speak out again. And I started speaking out, and I'll be honest, since late 2022, and this was after Jack Singlob died, who was kind of part of, was right up the road from me in Williamson County, to where I was, and part of the formation of a lot of this. He was involved with all these black sites and the clandestine operations and stuff going way back, dirty history. So after he passed and after all this stuff happened, I decided to speak back out. I had escalating warnings, threats, retaliation. My business was sabotaged. I was chased out of Nashville. Bad things happened. Me and some of my associates, we started sending little bits of evidence to journalists, to some of these like advisors and some of these advisors and some of these staffers of like, SSCI, Armed Forces Committee staffers, stuff like this. I'm only going to reference what I've spoken publicly because we did it to a lot more people, but I'm only putting on blast to where I found them compromised. So we started sending that, within 24 hours, there was me and two of my associates were seriously attacked. I was out jogging, got hit with something. It was some sort of directed energy, started projectile vomiting. My brain felt hot. I was in bed for a week. I'm still affected to this day. Very stressful. My other friend, he got attacked with his wife. Again, directed energy sort of thing. His wife had some sort of like Bell palsy, facial paralysis, had to go to a facial surgeon. My other friend also got retaliated on. Within months, he developed fast onset, fast acting cancer and passed. It's very stressful, very, very sad. I would not say that I'm allowed to do anything. On one end, yes, I am surprised I hadn't just been killed. I was fully prepared to, and actually wasn't that responsible in my actions because I kind of thought I was crashing out, just to be honest with you. It is what it is. But no, there's definitely no being allowed to talk about this. There is certain lines that I'm like building up the gall to cross even, and me and other people trying to do this responsibly without just leaking information that will re-victimize people and be fruitless, trying not to leak information that will needlessly risk people that are sources if it's not going to be fruitful. So I'm kind of escalating, speaking out, and pushing basically the message of organized safety, which is our safe method to anonymously build up corroboration to come together and prepare it on the back end before people are stepping out. That way, you can come forward as a group to the right parties, and we're trying to build public awareness, calling on bureaucrats, calling on, everybody and anybody involved, the proper channels to have some public dialogue to actually address this trauma, this technology-based mind control, and to address the corruption at large and have a real conversation, and to meaningfully engage in a real way, a safe way, not saying, hey, yeah, we're listening, come send us some stuff, and attempting to isolate people where they can contain them, they can neutralize them, they can retaliate them, and, because they try to separate people one at a time. But yeah, so I mean, I'll be honest, quite frankly, it's been horrible. And it is what it is. I've, essentially, just to be honest, speaking out this time, have lost everything but my life. It is what it is, and I'll never stop. They would have to take my life to shut me up at this point. And, I'll keep on escalating, and the larger of a stage and the larger of an audience I get, the more I will say. But it's just only worth it so much as it goes up, because again, I'm not just going to dump everything that I know, if it doesn't seem like it's going to be fruitful. So strategically, we're holding back. And yes, there are several people with just data dumps of evidence, including of active members, very high ranking, all the way up to the director level.
You said something interesting. It does seem like there is tons of information coming out right now. There's also people who are being used as these sacrificial lambs, thrown out to the fire. And while we all have our eyes on those that are being pointed to as the ones we should be looking at, the real ones in power are just transitioning everything to a more technologically based, AI algorithm-based control system, and they're just getting rid of all the old players. So it really wouldn't matter that much if some of this information comes out, because they're portraying themselves as the white hat cleanup crew that is changing everything for the better, while at the same time, with the left hand, they're implementing this other type of control system. Is that right?
But absolutely, that is 100% right. That is the thing. They are burning sacrificial lambs to minimally tick the boxes to appease the public while they slip in the real, the Trojan horse. This is a Trojan horse, And yes, front facing, it looks like things are getting cleaned up and that some people are changing, but the real people pulling the strings, the actual people in power, the powers and principalities that be and have been are still the same. The exact same ones are still behind this, that have been behind this. The same groups, that has not changed. They're just doing the Janus rollout, the Janus end times, if you will, to where the face is switching and they're just ping-ponging people's attention, and creating different pockets again for people to fight against themselves. The main dissent that would kind of stand up and fight largely have been fooled by the current regime, just to be honest, and they're kind of strategically picked who to satiate and what to do and play it back and forth. And precisely, that's what's going on. That's what people have to understand, that at this point, all the bloodliners and stuff like this, they actually have put themselves through this, and they have dissociative identities that don't require apparatus and are bound to this by blood, right? But they have a fully implemented technological control to where they don't have to have personnel managing other personnel as much. It's basically they have artificial intelligence and algorithms that are managing people on the individual level, down to their social media feed, down to their communications. Everything's monitored and flagged. If certain things comes up and they get flagged, if they cannot be, neutralized by kind of like automatic means, right, then perhaps people will step in manually. But yes, this is largely being managed by artificial intelligence. Research and development technology has, got to a certain point, and that's being rolled out more and more, expanding on the populace. It's important to understand that this started from a top-down approach. They didn't start controlling each individual person of the populace. First, they had their leaders and their influencers, and then they would hand it down to the people. And that's still the deal, and they still are the most controlled. The influencers are leaders, and so on and so forth. They have the most strings pulled, they have the most to lose, and they are the most directly controlled. But, now it's getting to the point, after all this research and development and fine-tuning, and the technological advancements, now, yes, this is being rolled out, and there is more and more control at the individual level that's being down to literal technological brain mapping and micro corrections from remote frequencies. Literally, that's what it goes down to. There was remote neural monitoring and feedback loops came out in 1995 in a lawsuit against the NSA. That was in Nexus magazine. People can reference that. They had the ability to see through someone's eye at that point, and that was at the Manchurian candidate level. Some of this actually even came out in the Snowden leaks, and that's not my full opinion on Snowden and all that, but some of this even came out then. Only 5% of what was leaked through Snowden actually hit the public. People don't never hear about this, okay? But what's going on is, yes, unfortunately, there are ways to where, populaces don't only get blanketed with like certain frequencies to dumb them down and so on and so forth. At this point, the technological means are there for literal hacking the human brains, just as, they said at the WEF and stuff like this. Like, they can hack human brains and make micro corrections. People work off of frequencies that go on, electrical impulses. That's what it is. That is more and more understood and utilized against the populace, more and more even to the individual level at this point. Yeah.
Wow. Let's get into the spiritual or occult practices that are being utilized at the highest levels. And this is also where you lose a lot of people, because it can get very dark and unbelievable, some of the things that you hear coming out of these stories and these groups of occultists. Yeah. What is it that they are actually involved in? What are their beliefs? And how are they implementing this on society? What is the end goal of all of it?
So, if I may, to touch on, because this is what it gets to, and I'm of the mind that whether you believe in the actual phenomena aspects of this or not, I tell people like this. As a child, I was told Santa Claus wasn't real. I never believed in Santa Claus while all the other kids did. What I did believe was that I had invocations and I had communication with entities that would tell me secrets and give me powers and promise me a certain future. Was that real? it didn't matter if it was real, because I was a little kid that was out of control. And when you brainwash a little kid from young, and that's what that little kid believes instead of Santa Claus, that's a lot on your hands, okay? People only know what they were raised to believe. As foreign as it seems to you, there's different religions, there's different cultures that people don't understand. What they purport to do is they commune with spirits, with entities, call them gods, call them angels, call them demons, call them aliens. There's a spectrum of life out there. You only see this much of the visual spectrum that's this much, right? There's all sorts of things. And also, there might be some things that you could see in the visual spectrum, but it's too small, right? I mean, this gets down to parasites that are too small, but we know that parasites, for example, from cat poop can control, and affect your behavior. That the gut biome affects your behavior. It gets down to this level. But what these people do, you go back to, if you've heard of Enochian, I'm sure, which is like Aleister Crowley, basically OTO, Golden Dawn, all this is based kind of on Enochian communication protocols. John Dee and Edward Kelly are largely credited for creating this system, to where John Dee was known as original 007. He signed his letters like that. He was the eyes for Queen Elizabeth, and he would advise and do these things. And he basically went through a communication protocol using necromancy and means like that, to where he made an alphabet and a whole communication protocol to where he got in touch with he purported to be angels. And what happened was they were essentially testing him. They were testing him and his partner, Edward Kelly, with demoralizing, escalating tests, right? That quickly progressed to wife swapping and other moral debauchery, okay? And they said, hey, you want the secret? Do this. Y'all get with each other's wife. It's like someone calling for you help, and you're messing with them. Okay, well, I'm so rich and I'm so powerful. What do I want to do? Y'all do this stupid stuff. If you do that, I'll give you $100. You understand, these things that they communicate with, and they could be fake. Maybe it's fake. But if it's real, these are intelligences and other things that don't care about people, and they will play with you like you're a little plaything. But if people go through these experiences, take someone that's went through a near-death experience, take someone that took hallucinogens and went on a shamanic journey. This is a life-changing experience. Take someone that's, took peyote, any of these. People go to these retreats, try ayahuasca, all this stuff. It's a life-changing experience when they do it once, and it rocks their world. Well, there's cultures and people that have been doing this for so long, they have specific protocols, and they go and meet the same thing. There's situations that can be replicated, okay? So how fake is that? Is it just part of the mind, and essentially you do certain stimuli, from your, line up visual frequencies that line up with sound frequencies and line up all these frequencies, and, kind of like a cosmic fisherman making a certain lure and a thing comes? Who knows? But people go through these experiences, and it's life-changing. And it's simply, whether you believe in the phenomena or you want to try to explain it scientifically, their temporal lobe gets stimulated. It creates vivid imagery. It stimulates their emotional aspects, and it feels cosmically significant, of vital importance, and it just seems like the most important thing of their life, okay? And they go through experiences to where what they experience, they would do anything to replicate. It's better than any drug you could do. It's better than anything. They go through these things, and they feel what real power is. They feel what true pleasure is. They feel and I say true, I'm just talking about to them in the moment. So they put themselves through these experiences that can be recreated, and they essentially get on the hook. And there's things that just make more sense. Some say, hey, it's just part of the brain, going back to Greek, the demos, right? Or this and that, the interpreter, different things like this. Is it external? Is it internal? Whatever you want to believe. They put themselves through this process where they have communication with something that's perceived to be independent of them. And these things, get them to do stuff, okay? And it basically, over time, the same ruling powers that be, the same bloodlines have done this. Are these people, do they have a reptilian aspect? Do they do this? They go through things to where they deliberately intertwine themselves with energetic consciousnesses. They infest themselves with parasites that affect them on a deep level. Did just their reptilian brain expand over time? Are these parasites affecting their mind and then pass down to future generations and affecting them like that? I believe that it can be scientifically explained. It doesn't have to be one or the other. To me, it's spiritual science, and it lines up whatever you want to believe, whether you believe it's an entity, whether you believe it's scientific and just, parasites and just consciousness and just the way things work. But they simply put themselves through protocols, they put themselves through experiences that can be recreated, and it leads to them becoming absolute psychopaths. They are bloodthirsty, money-hungry, power mongers, warmongers, and they seek to assimilate by any means necessary. And it has been found that it's easier to tell people that they want to believe and let them believe that they're happy and be in an open air prison where they can own nothing and be happy than having to force and fight them to do whatever. They don't want to be forcing people to do what they want all the time. They want people to be compliant, happy slaves. That's really what it is. So, these people go through these things. If you ask me, yeah, there's spirits, there's a hierarchy of spirits and entities and intelligences. This is a wide and unlimited universe, and there's different things out there that use humans as playthings, and they're just playing with them, and they get a hold of some of these people that have been carrying on their family dynasties, putting their young through this, and keep on going on this, and they're just complete psychopaths that just want to assimilate and rule the world, and are doing whatever they can, whatever they want.
You said that there's a spectrum of these intelligences. Would you say that there is also benevolent intelligences that do have humanity's best interest in mind, that these groups fear, or some sort of adversarial force to the darkness that they work with?
Yes, I would say absolutely. And I wouldn't say that they necessarily have humanity's best interest in mind. Maybe some of them do, but they have different interests that more are closer aligned with what would be perceived as humanity's best interest, because we're very imperfect people. Let's face it, and what we perceive as their best interest might be our best interest, but might not be like the universe, the world, a symbiotic relationship with everything. But there is definitely more positive, benevolent forces. Absolutely, 100%. I think that there's, a dichotomy of balance and everything, and there's a variety of things over there. And I mean, if you get into certain aspects, yes, that there's absolutely more benevolent, positive forces. And I think, yeah, I mean, and it's more complicated than that even, I think. But yes, there's absolutely opposing forces, and humanity's humanity. Just like, some animals that we get and we experiment on some, we have some as pets, we train some, we're not at the top of the food chain, and there's things that look at us just like we look at, animals that may be perceived as lesser intelligent than us. Yes, there's all of that going on.
Is there also that on the human level, what some would consider white hats that are working against the dark forces?
So I would say, yes, there's definitely people working against the dark forces, both. But like when we say white hats, because my experience is I was pulled into what I truly believed were white hats. And you hear about, hey, they're cleaning out their tunnels. Hey, they're doing this. No, that's not true at that level. No, the white hats essentially are being created, piggybacked on, used like infrastructure. We're even seeded up the chain. They're controlled by the same people that are really right now. Unfortunately, I do believe dark human forces are pulling strings and even are above the white hats. And they're letting them do certain things to make an appearance and then exaggerating it to the people, pacifying them, making people complacent, giving people something to hope in, something to believe in, giving them little wins to satiate them, to minimally tick the boxes so they can carry out their agenda as goes. You have to give them something. If you give them nothing, people would have no reason not to rebel. You have to let the people have something to live with. If they have absolutely nothing, they're cornered, and everybody knows a cornered animal is dangerous as well. It will just lash out. So yes, I do believe that there is people trying to do good, and there is some, or even some that organize together and stuff like that, but they're largely unorganized, to where these malicious parties and these malicious groups are more organized and are actually in something, to where it's much more looser freelance for the people that are really trying to do good, and they're constantly separated and attacked. These other people and these dark forces, these dark groups, they have generational momentum and infrastructure. And unfortunately, just like you see at big business, it's not the nicest guy that does the best, that makes less profit and serves the human, that's easier to climb. It's easier to climb if you're cutthroat and do by any means necessary. So unfortunately, just naturally, that kind of got skewed over time, and they're at this. But in my opinion, the saving grace is these dark people, dark forces in general, I think the flow of the universe is generally more benevolent, even though that there is obviously, a balance force, and there has to be balance and stuff like this. There has to be, on one end, bad for there to be good for you to appreciate it. Otherwise, there'd be lithium. I think that some of these people try to take universal principles and they pervert them. They invert them. They corrupt them. They try to use them to their advantage. And I think eventually, sometimes just the flow sorts itself out. And the harder these people go against universal principles, eventually it gets violently corrected.
What is the end game? What is the ideal utopia for this ruling class?
Essentially, lack of autonomy, lack of free will at the individual level, people being closer to like hive-minded slave class, to where they are just working and serving the interests of the master elite parasite class, at their whim. So people lack autonomy, lack free will. They may feel happy because they're being stimulated on their temporal lobe and, or whatever else, ingesting this and that. But they just want utter and complete control for their whims, so they can do whatever they want, and essentially complete and utter control.
There are many believe that there is an ongoing psychological operation when it comes to the extraterrestrial UFO narrative, that may be integrated in our near future as the next big event, the next big false flag operation. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's coming down the pipeline?
That's something that I warn of, and I'll be honest. If you talk to, you're not going to hear this from a lot of people, because a lot of these people that are high up, for example, in the government, NDAs, got all the strings attached to all this. There's something called lightning strike, and that is a false flag alien attack to where there's a partial depopulation. The people that are at the top of the government right now that aren't sinister believe that our current mandate from the actual non-human intelligence is that we must have a global governance, that there must be a one world nation, OWN. NWO, New World Order, and that we are mandated to have that by a certain time in order to join the Galactic Federation of Light. That's actually what a lot of these people are being told. It's funny that the end game for these positive people in the government are being told this and say, oh, the end justifies the means, because we have to become a part of this, just so we don't have like rogue independent things misusing technology that's rolling out and stuff. But it's still the same exact quota that, these negative entities that have, and people have been warning about going way back. So yes, absolutely. And you have to think, like, go back to Operation Northwoods, to where, we were going to do a false flag attack, blame on the Cuban government, right? And the false flag doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means it does happen. It was just contrived, and then there's lies that go along with it. But if you are doing a false flag and blame it on aliens, it's not like the aliens are going to say, hey, no, that wasn't us. So we're in a lot of danger, because yes, there is in my opinion, from what I understand and from what other insiders are saying, that yes, there is the danger of a false flag alien attack. Even people that warn against it. For example, you have Greer, has been warning against, hey, they're saying these aliens are going to do this and do this. He's been warning of this, but then he's at the same time is saying that, hey, these aliens are angry that we're shooting down their craft, or we're being told this and this and that. So he's still setting the stage for it, even though he's warning against it. From all the angles, they have set it up for this to happen. People need to know as well. There was just a study at Skinwalker Ranch by Dr. Christopher Kit Green, and he apprenticed under Andrea Puharich, who was like the foremost mind control doctor, created, the remote telepathy, was responsible for the terms indigo children, space camps, all that, right? So Dr. Christopher Kit Green created the Skinwalker Ranch study, medical interference syndrome study. That established ICD-10 medical insurance codes. Those are to treat essentially anomalous health incidents, AHI, or Havana syndrome, interference syndrome. So essentially people that happen to have like UFO experiences, contact experiences, and they become damaged, the ICD-10 codes are so medical insurance can code and treat this and kind of handle it on their system. That was established, and you don't hear that about it. The reason that was established, and the reason it was established at Skinwalker Ranch, which is an exotic weapons testing ground, by the way, and there's evidence to back that up. The reason that was because there's plausible deniability. A lot of people think, oh, there's NHI, there's stuff. I'm not saying there's zero NHI going on there, but it's important that the basis of where these ICD-10 codes were established was where there's plausible deniability to say, hey, this is coming from NHI and UAP unexplained phenomena. And the scary part of that is because they know as they roll this new technology, as the billionaires, military intelligence, all that flying around on their fancy flying toys, as they roll out these new drones, as the surveillance grid increases, as we have this, these blanketing, faster remote wireless technology, 5G, 6G, they're doing the Internet of nano things. They're running internet literally through people's bodies, so where people are getting MAC addresses and can be logged into, and you can look into this as out there as it sounds. Like, this is very real stuff if you look it up. They have established these codes for plausible deniability, say it's NHI, because they know there is increased biological adverse effects to the health. There's tissue damage. There is a variety of adverse health effects, and they have created the codes to treat that. And what they're doing is establishing the basis to, disclose some of what's been going on behind the scenes. Yes, we are not alone. Yes, there's other things. Yes, there's agreements. And sometimes humans get harmed, so they can do what they please. And if it gets too bad, write it off to aliens, write it off to unexplained phenomena, write it off to this. So yes, we're not only facing like an imminent major false flag, but just also passively, the plausible deniability and the basis have been covered for them to roll out tech and use it at their whim. And we can claim some, but then they don't have to claim the other aspects. And, they roll out some, say, hey, we have this. We would have told you if we had more. That's not us, so on and so forth. So yes, the stage has been set, unfortunately, and it's very dangerous.
I can drive down the street in my relatively small town and see on every corner there's a new piece of technology on the street lights. There are poles that are dressed up like trees hiding 5G towers, but it's increasing more and more, and on every street corner. You can't get away from it nowadays. And what you're saying is this could provide this blanket of frequency over large areas that could have multiple of different effects on consciousness, the human body, our health, what we perceive things to be. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And there's patents to directly support that, as well as just, massive testimony going back decades of people that worked on these projects. Yes, that's precisely what I'm saying.
Now, we got a few minutes left. Let's offer some solutions, if any. From what you're saying, this is such a large-scale, ongoing, multi-generational operation. It seems too big to fail. How do we as individuals or small groups combat this, or at the least try and opt out of it?
So in my opinion, this is the main way that me and other people are fighting it, and this is the way that I see it. This is a transitional period, and you have past generations that went through this MK Ultra Monarch and just, more trauma-based mind control. Again, it's the same parties that are still ruling in the background. They're trying to act like they cleaned it up and handing it over, but it's still the same controlling entities in the background. The people that had direct contact with them and were directly involved that are willing to whistleblow, they're trying to clean house. They're trying to contain or neutralize. They either want to contain, retain, reclaim, or close out. Okay, so we're going through a transitional period where they're cleaning house. That's why what I'm saying is it's almost now or never. The people that were involved at different degrees of this, willing to speak out. That's why we created organizesafety.org. You go submit a tip anonymously. Create a new Proton email address, okay? Don't lose it. And you can anonymously give all the information you want. Opt in, because there's checks for either opting in just for questions, general questions, or opting in for notifications if it's corroborated, okay? 5 people, 10 people name the same person, high up here, high up there, whatever it is, you'll get notified. Then we have a liaison, we'll contact each other, we'll come together, and then we can present credibly once we kind of like create on the back end and establish like a grouped package that we can present with a bow to the proper channels. At the same time, though, that's only one piece of the puzzle. The other is we have to get public awareness, because when we hand off, and we've already handed off some of this information, real whistleblowing, not like who they're presenting, okay? When we hand this information off, we need to be able to lean back on the public and say, hey, we just handed evidence of 10 people, 20 people of this evidence to the proper channels here at the FBI, here at this. And look, unfortunately, nowhere can be trusted, and there's a degree of compromisation everywhere, right? But what we need to be able to do is say, hey, we've presented this evidence. Why isn't this being acted on? There needs to be public pressure. People need to ask. It needs to be common knowledge. There needs to be at-length conversations about behavioral modification. If behavioral modification isn't discussed at a high level and in depth, and there at least is a rudimentary understanding that it's, very active and heavily employed, I just don't know how we'll ever overcome anything. That's the battle here in my mind. That's what it is. And I think anybody that's really competent and that operate at a high level understands that. So, what we needed to do is, before this is fully transitioned and before these generations die out that were involved, and then all that's left is these new generations that were raised in this and, have only experienced the more remote, remote control that you just can't pinpoint as much, that you can't point a finger, the more plausible deniability aspect. We need to do this now. So, just talk to your fellows, spread awareness and let people know, hey, if you have your UAP whistleblowers, UAP insiders, ask them, hey, what about MK Ultra Monarch? What about trauma and technology-based mind control? This needs to be addressed. Demand it from your local politicians, your local bureaucrats. Put pressure on everybody. Don't get angry. Don't fight. Just seek to educate. I highly recommend that as a starting point, people look at the 1995 ACHRE, the Advisory Committee for Human Radiation Experimentation. There was a 20-minute testimony by Valerie Wolf, Claudia Molin, and Chris DiNicola. They talk about Manchurian candidate-level mind control programming. That was presented at a presidential committee, and it was corroborating evidence from specialists across the nation, blindly corroborating from tons of patients, tons of subjects that experienced this. People have to know that there is a nationwide and worldwide network of dissociative trauma therapists and specialists that know about this mind control programming and treat it. There is active campaigns against them, not only disinformation and misinformation and flooding to overwhelm people, but there's active retaliation and suppression. People need to know that there are specialists that know about this. There is just an astounding number of subjects and people that the environment's hostile if they speak out. They get picked apart. Some of them are traumatized and can't articulate well. It's very hard. Some of them are a little bit confused and have been through a lot of trauma. But people need to know that there is tons of specialists and there is tons of victims. There's tons of experiencers of this. And it needs to be addressed. If we address the population that has long been ahead of the curve disclosing this, and the people that are helping them, and we support them and we give them the space to come together, we hear them at length, and we don't zone in on any one, two people, one small group. We listen to where the information overlaps, and we see the people that keep on getting named and follow up with reasonable, credible questions to the responsible parties. We can get to the bottom of this, because we need to address this now before the generations that experience the hands-on method die off, and then all that's left is these future generations that are just really controlled and are just getting, blasted and bombarded with frequencies. And as ridiculous as that may sound, again, this is all supported by patents. This is all supported by specialists that even worked on these projects, then found out they were being used maliciously, and there is very credible supporting evidence and documentation about this. So just, people need to understand, hey, again, there is a huge community, okay? RAMCOA, ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse. There's a lot of different names for it, but dissociative trauma therapists deal with victims of these all the times. They get suppressed, they have to be quiet, they get retaliated again, but you can go and find out that this is what's going on. I encourage people, check into, for example, survivorship.org. They've been long-standing. They put out some great conferences and lectures from professionals that are very, at the scholar level, like very good briefs and introductions. If people want to listen directly to the testimony of survivors, I encourage people to look at Emma Catherine's The Imagination podcast, Imagine a Better World. And again, listen to survivors at length. Don't listen to the very little peaks of this that certain parties tell you to gain credibility. You'll have some of these large channels that talk just a little bit about Epstein or something like this, but they leave out the most pertinent aspect. These aren't just politicians getting their rocks off preying on children. This isn't just about blackmail. These are people that at these parties trauma bond to future assets as a handler. Just as you bond to a dog when you get them from the expert trainer and hand it off and you learn the commands, these people end up trauma bonding. They learn the commands. They have that trauma bonding, with these assets, and then can handle them later in life with the codes, with this, and they had that trauma bonding experience. That's how this works. And people need to understand that, hey, you need to go to the sources. Don't listen to the whitewashing. Don't listen to the limited hangout gatekeeping. You have people that claim to speak for this population. Why don't they have meaningful collaboration and communication with the long-established communities? Why do they suppress the individuals? What is going on? And it's very sad to know what's going on is that, the majority of these large channels that are addressing parts of this, most of them are unwitting to an extent, but some of them, are malicious, but these are limited hangouts. These are gatekeepers. And we need to go to the sources. We need to understand. We need to see where the information cooperates and overlaps. And we need to demand that everybody asks the right questions, has the at-length conversations, and looks behind the scenes. Hey, reporting over this technology. Hey, this UAP, these whistleblowers. What's going on with mind control programming? As ridiculous as that may sound, you go digging into the background, you'll see the reality of this. It's truly harrowing thought, but we need to address this at length. Otherwise, very soon it may be too late, barring some supernatural, whatever you want to get. That's really what it comes down to. Just, we need to have this conversation at length. We need to hold these large parties responsible and accountable, and don't be afraid to ask the questions. If you're asking questions and you get rebuked and you get retaliated on, why is that happening? It's really simple. People need to stop fighting amongst themselves and need to see that it's a divide and conquer, and they're trying to slip this Trojan horse in. And, we're right on the precipice. So come together with your fellows, ask the right questions, demand that people talk about trauma and technology-based mind control.
Since you started Organized Safety, have you had much success? Any leads? Any profound evidence gathered?
Yes, absolutely. And it's important to know that we've been running Organized Safety, started in 2013. I already had a database. Some of my associates come from this. We had a wealth of information, and there was already some out, public. But we've been running it privately since 2013, coordinating with these dissociative trauma therapists network. This was built inspired by Valerie Wolf at that 1995 ACHRE, where they released the corroborating information, but then it expounded on it and eventually made a safe way for people to anonymously submit and then come together. We have a gigantic database. When we started submitting some of these sample packages, to private parties, to these advisors, to these staffers of these committees, SSCI, so on and so forth, direct politicians, we got retaliated on. That's why we said, we had to fall back and we need public attention. And this needs to be a public conversation, because what they're doing is they're waiting for people to come on the back end, and then they're containing them, they're neutralizing them. All this information doesn't need to hit the light. We don't need to release all this information publicly to further traumatize people and further re-victimize people. But we do need to leverage public awareness to provide a semblance of safety that say, hey, this group is handing off serious evidence and serious corroborating testimony and has high profile witnesses going up. But, they're saying, okay, give me him. Okay, give me. Oh, y'all have a pilot that was involved with UAP recovery? Okay, have him come see us. No, they single them out, retaliate them, and neutralize them. And the ones that they're presenting, you notice they don't address the underlying aspect of this. Again, going back to the Manhattan Project, you start dealing with this nuclear level secrets, and UAP and all that falls under that level of thing. It's managed by the same entities. The underlying method is mind control, silence and compliance. They ensure it. There is fail safes where people that start whistleblowing, they experience what's called gamma programming. They'll start talking about things that make them sound crazy. If that doesn't work, a new threshold. It's like a post-hypnotic suggestion. If they start disclosing unauthorized information, if they remember too much consciously, then the next step is omega, which unfortunately causes self-harm. I mean, this is unfortunately like the mechanism that has kept everything under wraps and secret, gamma and omega programming. That's a large part of behavioral modification that's applied at the nuclear classification level. That's what people need to understand. We have a gigantic database. We have tons of high-profile witnesses, and all that needs to happen is the existing channels, that proper authorities, bureaucrats, law enforcement, if they publicly say, hey, we are willing to meaningfully collaborate and engage with, people to accept this evidence and and actually go with like a safe way to present this, because the way that they're intaking is compromised and it's designed to single out and neutralize people. But all they need to do is have some public acceptance. If people go on X and see, I have written a thing, I got 3 people, me and 2 other people that have confirmed a black site in Tennessee, for example, where a lot of this Rex 84 style training was going on, that linked back with Iran-Contra all the way, and named that publicly with 3 people. And, I made a plea showing some of my conversations with the SSC advisor, showing where a staffer at the Armed Forces Committee is like, oh my God, I had cognitive dissonance, but I see MK Ultra's a thing, because we showed them sample packages, okay? Yeah, we had horrible retaliation after that. So I made a public plea, tagging politician, all this, just to say, hey, publicly acknowledge that you're willing to talk and pursue this, because it's too dangerous, and the way that, y'all are intaking is designed to neutralize people. So all we need is just a little bit of a public push, or a lot of a public push, to say, hey, to demand transparency from these bureaucrats, to demand transparency from this law enforcement, and say, hey, yes, we will talk to these people. Yes, they are giving us information, and we are watching. If something happens to them, it will be taken care of. It's just something real. That's all that needs to happen. This can get fixed like that. People have been coming forward for so long. We need to stick up for ourselves. We need to take care of the people willing to go there. We're not asking people with families. We're not asking for people to risk themselves needlessly. We already have people willing to come forward, but they need to be able to come forward in a conducive pathway, not in this pathway that's leading straight off a cliff the way that it's designed.
Right on. So your website, organizedsafety.org, I'll have that link right in the description. Is X the best way for everyone to follow you on social media?
Yeah, that's basically the main social media. I have a YouTube and Rumble channel too. Mind you, before I went completely public with my name and stuff, to go to other people that have went through what I went through, which is like the most horrible, gruesome, torture you can imagine. Like I did this speaking out, which was very strategically theatrical with a mask and stuff. You see, like when Mossad will speak out and they'll have the voice mask, and all this in the dark. We control the media, we control the world, all that. I did some strategically theatrical stuff. People can pick that apart all they want. It's about the information. They can't pick the information apart. Okay, we have released some serious information that's indisputable. Such as showing legal exemptions for government research projects on criminal statutes for ritualized abuse of a child. You say satanic panic, all this. Okay, why do y'all have legal exemptions for ritualized abuse of a child for government research projects? MK Ultra. We have seriously credible evidence out there showing satanic ritual abuse sites with law enforcement confirmations, all sorts of stuff. Like the information is there. We have lots more to show. Again, people character assassinate me badly, and other people that stunt forward. It's nothing new. So you have to understand what you're dealing with, but dig into the information. It's indisputable. Okay. So yeah, I encourage people to follow me on X. If you have a report, remain anonymous, organizesafety.org, link up, let's come together, let's demand transparency, accountability, and provide safety for our fellows that are willing to stand up and do the right thing to help secure a positive future and safety for all of us.
Right on. Well, great. Thank you for coming on, sharing this information. I'd love to have you back on. There's many more layers that we can discuss about this topic. So until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening, and we will talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.